Everything seemed finally at peace. The old patriarch contemplated the valley of Shechem, surrounded by the promise and by gratitude. But what Jacob did not know was that tragedy was already walking toward his tent. A single choice, a simple curiosity, would bring shame, blood, and the pain that would mark generations. God had fulfilled his promise, but Jacob's house was about to be tested, and the name of Shechem would be remembered not for peace but for vengeance, for idolatry, and for pain. The wind blew gently over the valley of Shechem, swaying Jacob's tents, who now contemplated with teary eyes the land that God had promised him. He had crossed the Jordan, and each step up to there was a living reminder of the Lord's faithfulness. Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. Genesis 33:18. The prayer made at Bethel had been answered. He was back in peace, as the Lord himself had promised. The patriarch looked to the horizon and recalled Abraham, his grandfather, who on that same soil had raised the first altar to the Lord. Jacob then raised his own altar, calling it God, the God of Israel. The sound of his family's voices joined in prayer, echoing among the ancient hills. The altar smoked, and the soft smell of the sacrifice rose to heaven as a symbol of gratitude. The same soil that once received Abraham now sheltered Jacob and his sons, marking the fulfillment of the divine promise. However, the peace of Shechem would soon be broken. The serenity of the valley, which before hosted songs and prayers, was taken by screams and pain. Dinah, Jacob's only daughter, went out to see the daughters of the land, Genesis 34. And what seemed a simple act of curiosity became the door to tragedy. The young woman, enchanted by the beauty and freedom of the Canaanite daughters, was led to shame and reproach, and like a stone cast into water, the mistake of a single life made waves that reached the whole house of Israel. Simeon and Levi, seized by wrath and desire for revenge, plotted in silence. Their hands, which should have protected, became instruments of death. Under the disguise of a peace agreement, they shed innocent blood. And when the sun rose over Shechem, an entire city lay in ruins. When Jacob learned of the crime, he felt his heart break. The old patriarch, bowed by grief, murmured, "You have troubled me, making me stink among the inhabitants of this land. Since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house." Jacob's gaze lost itself in the distance, and the camp's silence weighed like a sentence. He now understood that the error of seeking friendship with the world bore bitter fruit. The house that should reflect God's character had become a stage of deception and violence. And even with time, the memory did not fade. In Egypt, when blessing his sons for the last time, Jacob still remembered with restrained tears, "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are instruments of cruelty. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel." Genesis 49:5-7. It was a bitter echo of the pain that once shattered Shechem. Twilight stained the sky with tones of orange and purple when Jacob rose from the weight of anguish. His eyes, tearful with sadness, scanned the camp and saw the harsh reality around him. Cruelty and falsehood had taken root in the hearts of his sons. Strange gods and idols occupied places in his own house. Idolatry, subtle and silent, had infiltrated even where fidelity to God should reign. Jacob understood that the Lord's mercy had manifested by sparing them the punishment they might deserve, and that divine protection over his family could not be taken as mere accident. Each act of insubmission, every small deviation of faith, became a stone on the path of redemption. His heavy heart reflected the conflict between pain for his children's wrongdoing and hope in the divine promise. While the camp filled with murmurs and restless glances, the Lord's voice sounded in Jacob's inner being, calling him to depart to Bethel, to the south, the place of his first vision and of the sacred vow. Bethel was not just a memory, but a meeting point with the divine, a milestone of fulfilled promises. Before leaving, Jacob made a firm decision. The house must be purified. With serene authority, he ordered, "Put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments. And let us arise and go up to Bethel. And I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went." Genesis 35:2-3. Each word reverberated among the children, awakening a mixture of fear and reverence, a silent power that touched the soul and aroused conscience. Jacob, with trembling hands and a heart warmed by the memory, relived his first visit to Bethel. When he was still a wandering youth, fleeing to save his life, the Lord had appeared to him in vision, promising care, protection, and offspring. Now the same hand that had guided his flight led him again to the same sacred place, and Jacob shared the story with his sons, awakening in them an unexpected reverence. One by one, the children handed over the strange gods and the earrings of gold that adorned their ears. Jacob gathered them and hid them under the oak near Shechem, a silent gesture, but laden with meaning, separation from sin, purification, and spiritual preparation for the encounter with God. Genesis 35:4. The journey to Bethel took place under divine protection. A mysterious fear fell upon the region's inhabitants, so that none dared to confront the travelers or attempt revenge for the disaster in Shechem. Thus Jacob and his family crossed the hills and valleys unmolested, each step marked by the Lord's silent presence. Upon arrival, Bethel's atmosphere seemed to breathe expectation, reverence, and peace. There again the Lord revealed himself to Jacob, confirming the promises and the divine covenant that had accompanied him since youth. In response, Jacob raised a pillar of stone, solid and firm, a tangible remembrance of God's faithfulness and a mark of the altar he had built to the Lord. Genesis 35:14. The silence that followed was heavy, but sacred, a space for the soul to absorb the divine presence and the security of the promise fulfilled. The wind carried a heavy silence when Jacob reached Bethel, and there, among sacred hills, he came to weep for the loss of Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, who had accompanied him since the days of Mesopotamia. Each wrinkle, each gesture of the old woman reminded him of his mother's tenderness and the bonds of fidelity that crossed generations. Jacob contemplated the ground where the old woman was buried, and silent tears fell upon the earth, baptizing the place with the memory of her devoted and loyal life. The oak under which she was buried received the name Oak of Weeping, and there, amid the whisper of the wind and the distant song of birds, the patriarch felt God's presence comforting his mourning heart, showing that even the most silent fidelities are remembered and preserved in Scripture. The journey from Bethel to Hebron, which would last only 2 days, brought another painful trial. Rachel, Jacob's beloved, departed from life during the way, leaving a deep void. He remembered the years of hard and long labor that had been lightened by love for her, and now with the wife's death, every effort seemed shrouded in shadow. Even decades later, already in Egypt, Jacob, when narrating his story to Joseph, did not forget that moment. And when I came from Padan, Rachel died in the land of Canaan in the way, when there was yet but a little way to come unto Ephrath, and I buried her there in the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. Genesis 48:7. Rachel's loss would remain the most pungent mark of his long journey, reminding that even the strongest man deeply feels the weight of farewells to those he loves. Before departing, Rachel gave birth to her second son. The mother's last breath brought with it the name Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, but Jacob, looking to the future and trusting in the Lord's strength, called him Benjamin, son of the right hand, or my strength. The child became a symbol of hope amid sadness, while the mother remained buried on the road, guarded by a pillar, raised in memory of her life and sacrifice. Each step of Jacob on that route was marked by reflection and silence, reminding that blessings and losses walk side by side in the faithful's life, and that God, even amid pain, fulfills his promises with precision and love. On the way to Ephrath, another shadow stained the family. Reuben's action, the firstborn, which resulted in the loss of primogeniture privileges. Despite that, Jacob continued firmly, guided by the divine purpose. Upon reaching Hebron, he met his father Isaac, sick and blind, offering him years of care and comfort that would ease the old patriarch's solitude. There also the meeting with Esau brought the long-awaited peace. The brothers, who once nurtured envy and rancor, now separated in harmony. Esau heading to Mount Seir. God in his providence had granted Jacob not only material wealth, but also the greater blessing of understanding, reconciliation, and spiritual security, allowing both to prosper within the divine plan, albeit on separate paths. Genesis 36:7. Silence hovered over Jacob's camp, while the memory of Esau, his brother, mixed with the weight of human choices before God. Both had been instructed in the ways of truth, Both had the freedom to walk in God's commandments and obtain the Lord's favor. However, their paths diverged. Esau gave value to earthly goods, to immediate satisfactions, while Jacob, though by tortuous and flawed means, sought the spiritual inheritance, the blessing of faith and communion with God. The patriarch now recalled that divine election is not arbitrary. He that believes on the Son has everlasting life, and he that believes not the Son shall not see life. But the wrath of God abides on him, John 3:36, and that obedience to the Lord, vigilance, prayer, and constant faith are the criteria that establish true inheritance. Each human choice had a price, each decision a reflection of one's soul before God. Jacob deeply understood that God's ways are just and that grace is granted to all, but the results depend on obedience and character shaped by faith. Esau, by despising the spiritual inheritance, voluntarily separated himself from God's people, giving himself to what would pass away. Jacob, although initially cunning and calculating, learned through painful experiences and confrontations with his own fallibility to submit entirely to the divine will. The night at the Jabbok, when he wrestled with the angel, was the point of transformation. Cunning and deceit were consumed, and in their place rose simplicity, truth, and sincere trust in the almighty arm. The patriarch now felt the peace that accompanies refined character, the true gold of faith emerging after the flames of trial. Jacob's life memories, his struggles, deceptions, and achievements were permeated by God's constant touch, who guided even the most uncertain steps. He had learned that seeking blessing by human skill generates conflict with divine providence, and that true value lies in faith, humility, and perseverance. Thus each act of Jacob, from the crossing of the Jordan, the purification of the house in Bethel, to reconciliation with Esau, became a living lesson of submission and fidelity. The lower elements of his character were consumed in the furnace of experience, and in their place shone the faith that had united Abraham and Isaac, now visible in Jacob, his face reflecting serenity, his hands turned to heaven, and his spirit aligned with the Lord's will, ready to fulfill the promise God had made to him and his offspring. The sun rose over the valley, illuminating Jacob's tent. While the patriarch watched with heavy heart the bitter fruits of a life marked by polygamy and family disputes, jealousy among the wives had contaminated the home, generating contention and rivalry among the children. Each step, each gesture of the older sons carried a trait of disobedience and pride, and Jacob, though loved and respected, saw himself powerless before the corruption of character that grew before his very eyes. Fear and anxiety clouded his hours, and his soul was afflicted by the disorder within the family, reminding him that even old mistakes cast shadows over future generations. Among those sons, however, arose a rare and pure light, Joseph, Rachel's firstborn. His beauty, delicate and firm, reflected not only outward harmony but the purity of his heart. Joyful, active, and obedient, he showed early moral ardor and firmness of character. He listened to his father's instructions with reverent attention and sought to walk in God's ways, demonstrating kindness, faithfulness, and truthfulness in every act. The loss of his mother tightened the ties with Jacob even more, who came to love Joseph with incomparable intensity, nourishing for him a care and affection that stood out among all the children, Genesis 37:3. However, paternal love, when displayed visibly, became a source of discord. The brothers, observing the affection and privileges granted to Joseph, felt slighted and were inflamed with envy. Every rebuke from the young man about their wrongful acts increased the hatred against him. Jacob, cautious, tried to correct without provoking anger, asking them to respect the white hairs and, above all, not to dishonor God with their impiety. But the sons only hid outwardly the resentment that ate them inside, and each act of Joseph, as pure as it was, became reason for suspicion and rancor. The culminating point of envy came with Jacob's imprudent gift, a coat of many colors, a sign of distinction and preference, which made the father's partiality even more evident. This gesture, together with Joseph's recounted dream, turned paternal love into fuel for the brothers' rage. "Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf." Genesis 37:7. The dream, simple in appearance, was interpreted as an announcement of primacy and domination, awakening in each brother's heart a storm of hatred and envy, foreshadowing the conflict to come that would forever change Jacob's family life. The sky over Dothan, deep and clear blue, seemed to witness the unfolding of an inevitable drama. Joseph, with a light heart and mind focused on his father's mission, advanced among hills and valleys, feeling the wind on his face and the fatigue in his feet. Unaware of what awaited him, he moved with joy and confidence, believing he would find his brothers and bring good news to Jacob. But his brothers, watching from a distance, did not see Joseph with eyes of affection. Instead, their hearts burned with hatred and envy. "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" Genesis 37:8, they cried, voices laden with anger, resentment, and old rancor, showing that even purity and divine inspiration can arouse opposition in hardened hearts. Joseph's second dream, even brighter and more symbolic, inflamed the brothers' fury further. "Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars made obeisance to me." Genesis 37:9. Each word seemed to drive a blade into hearts that refused to accept the superiority of faith and character. Jacob, hearing the report, did not discourage the son. He admonished cautiously, asking, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" Genesis 37:10. His warning, though stern in appearance, was tempered by hope and faith that the Lord was speaking to Joseph's heart, revealing the future of his descendants and of Israel. Joseph, guided by love for his father and obedience, departed to find his brothers. He walked for many miles, crossing hills and valleys, carrying not only the journey's weight, but the hope of calming Jacob's anxiety. However, the absence of news and the brothers' diversion to Dothan made the journey longer, and his heart remained firm, not fearing the evil his brothers hid. He advanced without imagining the silent plot forming, unaware that each step brought him closer to a danger that would change his life and his family's history forever. When at last the brothers saw him approach, Joseph's figure, the chief dreamer, stirred in them a storm of resentment and rancor. Ignoring completely the young man's effort, faith, and love, the colorful coat, a gift from Jacob, became a symbol of partiality and provoked the dark decision, "Let us kill him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, 'A wild beast hath devoured him.' And we shall see what will become of his dreams," at Genesis 37:20. Hatred, cultivated silently by years of envy and rivalry, turned into planned action, showing how jealousy and human wickedness can, even against innocence and purity, map paths of suffering and yet serve the unknown purposes of God. The sun scorching Dothan's land found Joseph, still oblivious to his fate, approaching his brothers. His joy and confidence quickly turned to horror on seeing the fury in the faces that surrounded him. They seized him violently, tearing off the coat that symbolized Jacob's love and filled him with mockery and threats. His pleas did not move the hardened hearts. Each gesture and word was guided by hatred and jealousy. Without compassion, they dragged him to a deep pit dug beforehand where Joseph was thrown, and the stone of destiny sealed his temporary prison. They left him there alone with hunger and cold, while they calmly sat down to eat bread, ignoring the silent moan that echoed from the earth's depths. Genesis 37:25. Yet among the brothers there was unrest and silent remorse. Some, like Reuben, could not forget Joseph's humanity and the injustice being done. He had suggested that the brother be put alive into the pit, with the secret hope of rescuing him later and returning him to Jacob, a plan he kept hidden to protect his intention from being discovered. But Providence's course presented itself in the form of a caravan of Ishmaelites crossing the region, carrying spices and goods to Egypt. The presence of those travelers radically changed the brothers' murderous plan. Judah, perceiving an opportunity to protect both his kin and the family's interests, proposed selling Joseph to the merchants instead of leaving him to perish in the pit. "For what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood?" Genesis 37:26-27, paraphrase of motive. He reminded them that even amid hatred and envy, they remained bound by blood and family ties. The proposal, cunning and cold, found immediate consensus, and Joseph was quickly taken out of the pit, still confused and stunned. His momentary freedom was not yet safety, but a decisive step on the journey that would take him to Egypt, to the fulfillment of dreams and to the demonstration of a divine purpose far beyond human intentions. Joseph's bewildered, frightened gaze met the sky above Dothan, and for an instant he felt the Lord's silent presence. The torn coat, the hands that held him, and the cold negotiation among his brothers were nothing more than instruments in Providence's hands to lead him to the plan God had designed for him. Each step toward the merchants, every gesture that seemed humiliating or threatening, formed part of the path that would lead Joseph to greatness and to his family's future redemption. At that moment, without understanding, Joseph began to live the unfolding that fidelity and obedience had reserved for him, while his brothers' injustice served, unbeknownst to them, the Almighty's purposes. The sky seemed heavy over Joseph as truth struck his mind like lightning. He was delivered into strangers' hands, a slave to unknown masters, and the fear of losing freedom, greater than fear of death itself, seized his spirit. His eyes begged his brothers, pleading for mercy, but his appeals fell on hardened ears. Some felt a spark of compassion, but fear of mockery and the force of the group decision silenced any impulse of pity. The caravan of Ishmaelites hurried on, and Joseph, still confused and anguished, disappeared from view, carrying uncertainty about the future and the pain of being betrayed by the very brothers who should have loved him. Reuben, returning to the pit intending to save Joseph, found it empty, and despair seized his soul. He tore his garments and cursed his own hesitation, running in search of his brothers, but it was too late. The plan had been accomplished. Remorse joined Jacob's fear, and awareness that now they could not repair the evil forced them to unite in the charade. With a sacrificed kid, they dipped Joseph's tunic in blood and presented it to their father as proof of an imagined death. The tension and terror they had anticipated when creating the artifice now manifested in Jacob's real anguish, who, seeing the tunic, exclaimed with a trembling voice, "It is my son's coat. A beast hath devoured him. Surely Joseph is torn to pieces." Jacob rent his garments in a sign of grief, clothed himself with sackcloth, and mourned many days, sinking into suffering that seemed without end. A father's profound weeping for the loss of his favorite son echoed among the hills, and no consolation could penetrate the open wound in his heart. His sons and daughters tried to approach, but were powerless before the patriarch's overwhelming grief. "With mourning shall I go down to my son to the grave," cried Jacob, words filled with despair and disbelief, while the reality of deceit and betrayal solidified. The brothers, though terrorized by what they had done, kept the truth secret, fearing their father's just reproach, but living under the heavy burden of the crime they had committed, a burden that could no longer be removed. Jacob's and his house's story reminds us that even among the ruins of sorrow, God continues writing redemption. No loss is in vain when the heart remains at the altar. No wound is definitive when there is repentance and faith. Like Jacob, we are called to leave idols behind, to purify our house and climb again to Bethel, the place where God's voice still speaks, and where his promises are renewed. If this message spoke to your spirit, if you also long for a reunion with the God who transforms tears into purpose, leave your like, write in the comments what God spoke to your heart, and share this word so that more lives are touched. For the true altar is not in stones, but in broken hearts that belong entirely to God.